Namo Nama everyone. So now today we'll be starting with a new chapter, My Shadow. So before we start reading the poem My Shadow, let's discuss about its author. The author of this poem, My Shadow, is Robert Louis Stevenson. So he was a philosopher, a journalist, poet, and travel writer. Now this poet used to live in Scotland. Treasure Island, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped, and A Child's Garden of Verses are some of his best known works. So this poem, My Shadow, is written by him. So now before we start reading the poem, do you know whenever there is light, someone follows you? Have you ever wondered who it is? Yes, it is our shadow, right? Our shadow follows us everywhere. So whenever there is light or when you walk in sunlight, you may have noticed your shadow. So this poem is about our shadow. So first let's start reading the poem. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me from the hills up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. So here the poet is referring our shadow as our companion, right? He's referring his shadow as his companion. It is something that he carries with him everywhere he goes. Now this poem is narration from a little boy. So the little boy has no idea what his shadow is. So he recognizes it as a boy. One of the first things he notices is how the shadow reflects him. He realizes that the shadow has no meaningful role. The shadow is identical in each and every way from head to the hill, right? So the shadow depicts the same thing that the poet does. He depicts the shadow jumping onto the bed before him. So he's referring his own feelings being replicated. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow. Not at all like proper children, which is always very slow. For he sometimes shoots up taller like an India rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little that there is none of him at all. So the second stanza of the poem is about the qualities of the shadow that the child notices. So he tells us that how the appearance of the shadow varies from time to time. The appearance of the shadow actually varies because of the sun, right? As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow also changes. So this appears to the narrator as highly unusual characteristic for a child. So he compares the shadow's rapid development to the bounce of an India rubber ball. It happens so quickly that it's difficult to keep up. Similarly, the shadow sometimes shrinks so much that it is not at all visible. So it becomes invisible. One morning, very early, before the sun was up, I rose and found the shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an errant sleepy head, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in bed. So in the stanza, the speaker is, recalling about a moment when the shadow did not appear. So this was strange to him because the shadow follows him everywhere, but in this particular incident, the shadow was nowhere to be found. So when he got up before sunrise, he saw shining dew on each and every buttercup. Right? He could see the dew drops on buttercups. So he was up so early. But the shadow, instead of following him on his morning walk or wherever he was going, the shadow was in bed. Like he was a sleepy head, he did not wake up with the poet. So according to the speaker, that was a poor judgment. So this was all about the poem The Shadow. Now the theme of the poem was that the main idea behind the poem was how a child is fascinated and delighted by his own reflection. The child is perplexed as how the shadows vary for everyone. So he's taken aback by his own shadow, that how he changes appearances now and then. So he starts to notice each and every small detail about his shadow. The child's shadow follows him around and performs whatever the child does. So because of that, the child has interest in his shadow. So this was all about the poem My Shadow. Thank you so much.